Testing. All right. 2 classes left. Even though, it's kind of, what am I going to do next? I'm not going to think about it. And I was clearing out, I was actually looking for something for this class and found a book which I'd really wanted to do a class on called, I don't remember what the book is called, but I already had notes on it, but I never taught it. And that was God According to Johnny Cash. I was using Johnny Cash songs to kind of, so it was, it's a good book, but I thought it would make for an interesting class. Are there extra maps? Yeah, there are. So we'll get to these when relevant, but I promised you maps. I wanted to offer up a kind of changing of the territories from 1947. This one has 1947 to, oh, that's cut off, so that's not gonna work. 1947 to 2011, and then this is 2023, essentially right before the, we're talking leading up to the October 7th attacks and the war that is currently going on. So today, we're going to go from 1948 to September 11th, 2001. Because obviously there's a massive shift in political views, especially the US foreign policy, which will definitely have an impact on what is happening. So if you remember, I'm gonna get rid of this cough drop, even though I want it. It makes me slur my word. All right. So if you remember, we kind of ended things with the Arab-Israeli War, 1948. The Israelis called this the War of Independence. And if you'll remember, the Palestinians called it the Nakba, which is the Arabic word for catastrophe. So you very much get a sense or a feeling of what this war was to both sides. One sees it as liberation, of freedom, of independence. The other one sees it as a total disaster. I thought it would be helpful to kind of highlight the Palestinian government and the major figures that kind of begin to take shape here post 1948. Because if you'll remember, there really wasn't a government. And Palestinians didn't really have an organized government, which is in part why all of the Arab neighbors were so heavily involved. But the Palestinian governments. So does anyone know what the main one is? No one's ever heard of the PLO? Palestinian Liberation Organization. And that is founded in 1964. And it's kind of formed under the sponsorship of the Arab states to finally give the Palestinian people a voice of their own. And it's kind of initially it's dominated by the Arab states. So still the Palestinians themselves don't have a lot of authority, don't have a lot of control, because the neighboring Arab states are really the one pulling the strings. But then comes along a pretty well-known figure, historical figure for the PLO, and that would be, oh, that guy. Very good, Yasser Arafat. 1969, he took control of what is the PLO, but it's also called the Fatah. So if you'll see on this map, the very colorful modern day one, in the bottom left hand section, you'll see these blue dots, blue marks, and the darker ones are the Fatah faction, which we can connect to the PLO, to the Palestinian Liberation Organization. And you'll see that the light blue is Israeli military and Fatah. So that's who we have. Now, one of the things about the Palestinian Liberation Organization is they kind of sit on the fence between peaceful negotiations, two-state solution with Israel on one hand, but they aren't entirely operating with clean hands because there still is an element to extremism. There's still an element to this idea of nationalism. So the big part of class today is going to be the reemergence of religion as a primary driver. If you'll remember, last class, in the class before, we talked a lot about the rise of nationalism. The PLO is a nationalist secular organization. Its aims are more in line with the aims of the early nationalist groups that we have. There are Muslims, there is Islamic influence, but it is, for the most part, a nationalist organization. Palestinian people seeking a nation for themselves, all right? But what you have is a lot of angry and upset people. So there will be kind of a melding, or there is kind of crossover between the PLO and another couple of groups we will talk about who are religious extremists. Let's both start with a H. Hezbollah and Hamas. So there is a little bit of kind of run over between these two groups, but the PLO runs this very thin razor because they are the ones that the Israeli government will talk to at times. But they also have to kind of talk tough. They have to, there's certain language they have to use to make sure that they don't lose the majority opinion. Because almost no one in Palestine is happy with their treatment at the hands of the Israeli government. So you can't be all, oh, they're wonderful people, we can't wait to make all these deals. You have to kind of ride that line of being tough, but also peaceable enough that we can sit down at the table and talk together. Has anyone heard of Black September 1970?
I've heard of it, but I'm not looking for it.
So this is the expulsion of the PLO from Jordan after clashes with the Jordanian king, King Hussein. And what this does is kind of signify the beginning of fracturing between the Palestinian Liberation Organization and its Arab neighbors who have important in starting the organization and also being its support. The PLO's actually engaged in the Lebanon Civil War, which pretty much lasts for 15 years, 1975 to I think 1990 or late 1980s. So this is an organization that has influence in Palestine, but it also has some influence outside of Palestine with Arabs in the neighboring Arab nations. So they do have they do have some movement. They do have some power. They do have recognition in the Middle East and kind of around the world. So I want to go straight to 1967. And what happens in 1967? The Six-Day War. Arab states try and launch this surprise attack against the Israeli government, and it couldn't go worse. Talk about planning to do something, executing it. The incompetence level, I mean, worse than Russia invading Ukraine. They're driven back. The Israeli government, once again, we talked about, their population is much smaller than their neighboring Arab states, but they have very advanced weaponry. They have the support of the United States government. They have a lot of US military weapons. So the Arab nations who attacked are pushed back quite easily. And the immediate response becomes, but the Arab states is like, all right, we're kind of done with this for right now. We'll talk hard. We'll want to put pressure on Israel, but it is kind of this realization that an Israel supported by the United States is a very difficult nut to crack. It is the reality of that. Having US arms, having European support, all of these things makes Israel very entrenched and very hard to deal with. This leads to what I would say will become the biggest tension between Israel and Palestine. And does anyone want to guess what that is? Because Israel was able to take a lot of land after the Six-Day War. So West Bank's part of that. It's actually Israeli settlements. So this is when the idea of Israeli settlements really comes into practice. And do you guys know anything about Israeli settlements besides just in general? Like, oh yeah, that's a thing. No.
Well, they're seeding Israelis inside.
Yeah. So think of this maybe, I'm trying to think about, what if the US just started putting in, subdivisions in Native American reservations? Like just smack dab in the middle and be like, this is ours now. Just kind of taking the land for themselves. And I would say this is when kind of these hardline policies really begin to take effect and wear on the Palestinian people. And I'll get into some of those details from my time in Israel. But I am going to share what it's like to be in a settlement. So when I was in Israel, one of the goals of our trip there was to kind of not only visit the holy sites and spend time in the beautiful area of the Sea of Galilee, but it was also to try and experience and learn about the tensions between Israel and Palestine. So one of the first things that we did was we went to an Israeli settlement in a Palestinian territory. I cannot describe to you how third world it was driving our bus towards the settlement. No grass, dirt, sand, trash, more people than you can imagine trying to live in a little complex, little apartment area. Nothing like it, I imagine, you really can see in the United States. It was very poor. So I don't even know if I should say that. I'd had some discussions with my tour guide, And he would tell me about their allotment of water. So they were only limited to a certain amount of water a day, and that was bathing, cooking, cleaning, everything.
So was it a punishment to be placed there?
No, the, the, the Israeli settlements is essentially Israeli expansion into Palestinian.
In the settlement, you led a very poor life, right?
Yes.
Well, are you talking about on the way there?
Yeah, in the Palestinian territories.
Oh, not in the settlement, the
No.
Israeli, okay, I thought you were
So-
saying the settlement, what they were living within these conditions.
No.
Yeah, okay.
So we pull up to the settlement, and it goes from being what you would consider a third world nation to I've just showed up at Chateau Alon.
Yeah.
And I'm not gates. I mean, they have walls 10, 15 feet high, can't really see out. We're let in through the gates and instantly green grass with sprinklers.
The golf course in Las
Yeah.
Vegas.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what it turned into. I wouldn't go as far as very large houses, green grass, well-cut lawns, well-manicured yards. And we went to kind of this community center within the settlement. And we'd been told we were meeting with somebody who lived there. And I remember sitting down, and the first thing he said to us was, "My fellow Americans." He was a lawyer from Chicago, who had been one of these people who had agreed to settle there. And his opening argument was that the people of Israel needed a safe place to live. And my immediate reaction was, I know Chicago is not the safest city in the United States, but I imagine the area of Chicago that you live in is pretty safe. So it was kind of this just almost sickening contrast and dissonance between why do you need to leave the United States? He's a lawyer in Chicago to come here and live essentially on somebody else's land because you need a safe place to live as a Jewish person. And to look out, I remember when we were at the community center, you could kind of see over, all this lush green grass, beautiful trees, back over the wall into just the desolation that was the community right outside. And it was the conversation we had with this gentleman quickly just turned into an argument. We asked a lot of questions. He didn't give us answers we appreciated. My professor who took us is a New Testament professor, Mark Allen Powell. His son had actually done his internship at the Lutheran Church in the Old City. And we were told a story. So in order to get building permits, and if you're Palestinian living in, say, East Jerusalem or something like that, you have to get building permits from the Israeli government, which everybody has to get building permits. But it is in the Arab culture, like it's not the United States. You don't get married and move out. It is kind of a family unit. You don't leave, you actually expand your house to fit your new family. Well, we're talking not a month. If you're lucky, months. And by months, I mean 9 months, years for a lot of these people to just add on small sections to their houses. Some people will attempt to do this without the permits. And what happened, at least in the time we were there, is the IDF would come, take everyone out of the house, and then bulldoze it because it wasn't up to code. And I remember us bringing this up to him, and he said, well, if you build in the United States without permits, there are, repercussions, fine, whatever. You may have to take it down, whatever it is. But there's no court. They're just showing up in the middle of the night, taking you out. And they had run to get my professor's son, thinking an American would be able to do something. And all he could do was kind of stand there with the family as their home was just totally demolished. So I use this just to give you an idea of kind of my experience of the Palestinian experience as these settlements begin to take root, and kind of how they are becoming second-class citizens, even in their own territories, which I think is really important for us to kind of internalize and understand that this is happening in areas within borders that are their own. It's not just a few Palestinians living within the boundaries of Israel, but this is beginning to happen within their supposed sovereign territory. So this kind of tension only begins to build. And for any of you that watch the news or read anything about world affairs, you know that Israeli settlements continue. And it's one of the big arguments today is the aim of the Israeli government essentially to drive out the Palestinians so they can essentially build settlements and cities and towns wherever it is that they want.
You know what the populations of Israel, Palestine are at that time?
At that time, I might have those statistics somewhere in my notes if I find them. If not, I will get them to you in our next class. But we're talking, this is an area smaller.
Maybe I'm thinking more comparison, Palestine versus Israel. Because my thought is Israel has much more.
In terms of population, Israel probably has more now, but I would say for the longest time, there's more Arab Palestinians than there were Jews.
Israel probably had a population right around Jersey.
Yeah, roughly. Yeah, and we're talking about a country that is, you could fit multiple in the state of Ohio. You could fit multiple Israel Palestines in the state of Ohio. But over time, more and more Palestinians are kind of driven out, which is why Gaza, West Bank is so crowded, because they're increasingly more and more being pushed into very small areas.
Yeah, when you go over there, is Golda Meir still in power?
No, I don't believe so. Sorry, I'm trying to find my extremism notes. There we go. But that's not to say the Israeli people live in total comfort. So when you're in Tel Aviv, or when you're in the new city of Jerusalem, you'll see that their buildings are constructed certain ways. And what do you think those certain ways are? Bomb shelters and buildings that can hopefully keep you protected from rockets. And there are bomb sirens. I was not old enough to live during the Cold War, but those practices, those drills of, everybody get under your desk or whatever, was very much kind of the life of people within major cities in Israel. So you can see it's just these two disparate experiences that are both hard and terrifying, yet still there is this disconnect between the two groups. They can both give voice to, this isn't how we want to live, but we can't really coincide and talk with each other in order to improve life here. So this tension is there. And for the longest time, this is a nationalistic identity issue. Then we have the rise of Islamic extremism. So there are hardline, radical, extremist Zionists within the Israeli government who believe this is the land that God gifted us. It is our natural born right to have it. You know, God gifted us this land. It should be ours. And that is policy that is being carried out right now.
So basically, manifest destiny.
Essentially, a return of what the destiny that God had promised us. Yes. This is kind of Netanyahu's go-to support base. He needs to appease them in order to stay in power. So they have probably more influence now than they maybe really ever had. But that's kind of been this tension that has been within Israeli politics for quite some time. Younger generations very much struggle with how this group, which is kind of a minority, has so much authority and control over government. But the groups that will really begin to make things worse or really ratchet up the violence and the tensions is Islamic extremists. So if you'll remember, at the very beginning or towards the middle of our class, when the Islamic caliphates or the Muslims had control over their territories, how did they generally view and behave towards Christians and Jews? Yeah, you paid a tax to practice your religion.
Yeah.
It was a domimi or something like that, dommi or something. But it was this tax you as a Christian would have to pay in order to run your business or worship God in the way you saw fit. But the Muslims were, for all intents and purposes, like, yeah, I don't care, worship whoever you want. Kind of that Roman practice of, yeah, you can have your king, you can worship whatever gods you want, just pay your taxes. It's all we care about, which was essentially kind of the policy. Arabs or Muslims, which some of which are Arabs, and Jews actually had, as you'll remember, a much more cordial relationship than Christians and Muslims or Christians and Jews did. So there was almost that kind of beneficial relationship. If you asked a Jew from the early Christianity, through the Crusades, who would you rather rule Israel, Jerusalem? The Christians or the Muslims? Unequivocally, they would probably all answer, yeah, we definitely want an Islamic ruler over us as opposed to a Christian ruler. So you can see within, the closer we are to the foundation of Islam, the more accepting and tolerant Islam is of other religions. This no longer the case with the kind of rise of Islamic extremism, which I think we need to once again step back and internalize what exactly is happening. So we've talked, yes, there were Christians on the crusade who were faithful people, who believed what they were doing was ordained by God, and that's why they did it. But there were other motivations, such as what?
They got money,
Yeah.
a lot.
You can make a lot of money heading out east and going on the crusades. Kings and lords who were going out there, wealth was to be had, lands were to be had. This could be a very lucrative venture and might have been one of the reasons as to why so many were willing to go and to kind of pay for an army to follow them out there, kind of expecting, this is an investment. This is going to pay off. What are some of the motivations you think there might be underlying or running along with a religious extremism in it, Islam? Yeah. I mean, the living conditions of the Palestinian people, a lot of these nations in the Middle East are struggling. This is kind of an area that is contested between the Soviet Union and between the United States. And why is that? What specifically? Oil. The United States, the Soviet Union, in fact, every major power in the world is very concerned with the Middle East because there's a lot of oil there. And that is pretty much the lifeblood
They view
of
Israel as a democratic state, and so they feel like that's stabilizing within the region.
which I'm going to go ahead and say the Western belief that we must always support democracies is kind of a joke, because what we really want is the support of our interest in those regions.
Yes.
It's the selling point. Hey,
Yes,
this is a
it's the
democratic
selling
state.
point,
But
yes.
we definitely deal with a lot of very undemocratic nations because
They
we
have-
can work with the individual and we can
They
get,
have something. to want.
yes, and they will work with us. And they're not socialists.
Yeah.
Because we still buy so much oil.
Yeah. I mean, the goal, I think, of the goal of other nations has always been, we have oil reserves here, but let's tap somebody else's first. So we'll still have some when there's lower. And one of the issues, and I think you see it in Saudi Arabia, the decadence, their money comes from oil and that's it. So you're seeing a lot of them now trying to figure out, this will have an end. How do we secure ourselves going forward
Yes, yes.
when the rise of electric vehicles and all the alternative fuel, whatever it is, they know oil will not be able to support them for long. But there's a lot of foreign interest in the Middle East, and Israel becomes something the West feels like it can deal with. It wants a stable partner in the region. Problem is, there's not really oil to be had in Israel. Most of the oil lies in Iraq, Iran,
But once
Saudi
again,
Arabia,
they think
Kuwait.
it's a stabilizing region, stayed there, versus if they weren't there, it would just be utter chaos.
There is a lot of chaos, a lot
No,
of
there is, but you have one stabilizing region, at least in US's view.
yeah. You want a foothold of
Yes.
some shape, of
Yes.
some kind.
Yes.
Israel would welcome US troops with wide arms should the times come,
Yes.
which it did in
Yes.
our
Basically,
conflict.
it's a military base for the world.
Yeah. But yeah, so this kind of religious tolerance was the traditional operating viewpoint of Muslims for a considerable amount of time. But because of the struggle of a lot of people within the Arab nations, and because of the struggle of the Palestinian people, you can see why this angst and this anger this resentment is just kind of boiling. And what we have is kind of this, how do you tap into that? How do people who are very angry tap into that power? And one of the easiest ways to do that throughout history has always been what? What is the means of that violence, though? Terror, yeah. How do you tap into it, though? How do you begin to harness
Oh,
it?
you're on a mission.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
having
Religion as the
religion, yes, it can become a vehicle, a way in which to take that resentment and aim it at something. And if you studied history or, people at all, you'll realize people can really easily be led to following something if they feel like they have an avenue and a target for their anger. Somebody comes along and says, they're the problem. God or whoever is, we have permission, we have a calling, we have a duty to rid ourselves of them. It becomes easy to kind of just fall in line.
And then too, they excuse it away and call it a holy war. We're fighting for God.
Yeah. It becomes kind of this, you feel like you're in the right because you're a victim already, but now you have this kind of higher sanction authority also kind of, even if no one else cares that we're in the right, it doesn't matter because our God is with us type thing. So with this, the continuing deterioration of life, the quality of life for Palestinians in Palestine, the continued Western interventions in the Middle East, it just kind of is leaving more and more people angry and resentful. And another thing we can really thank for this, anybody want to know? The internet. That's not a joke. Things like 2000 or things like 9/11 do not happen without the internet. Radical preachers online propaganda, kind of preaching that this is our calling, this is what we have to do. And it's the thing about all radical nationalist, radical religious movements is they take very complex situations, very complex theologies, things that, early church fathers wrote books about, struggling with, and they make it black and white. It's this and it's that. We're the good guys, they're the bad guys, as if it were ever that simple. My thing is, very often, if you ever have preachers who will constantly only give you black and white and never hint to the reality that we live in the gray, you've probably ended up someplace that you need to begin questioning what it is that this person is saying and struggle with your own points of belief. Because whereas God is holy, we are not. And there is some divide between us, our experience, and how God calls us to live in a broken world. Because it is, or it should be, very hard for us to discern what it is that we are supposed to do within very complex, difficult situations. But in the case of religious extremism, Islamic religious extremism, as we are talking about, becomes very black and white. God says we should do this, we can do this, and we should, because they're the bad guys. What is that term that becomes very popular? What are non-Muslims?
No, the infidel.
Very good. The infidels. They are the infidels. And that kind of brings us to what I would say is the most popular term of Islamic extremism, and that is what? Of Islamic extremism just in general. Oh, come on. Starts with a J. Jihad. And that doesn't mean I'm going to blow myself up. It doesn't mean I'm going to get myself killed. The word actually means struggle. Struggle.
Struggle?
Yes, the Arabic word jihad means struggle. And the traditional viewpoint is a spiritual struggle. So I had, when I was in Palestine, we were at the college, and one of the girls there who went to school was trying to explain to us what it was. And she had some Western education background and knew quite a bit about Christianity and talked about Paul's putting on the armor of God. So if you'll know, when Paul's talking about putting on the armor of God, he's not talking about literally putting on armor, grabbing your shield and your sword, or in a modern context, grabbing your gun, your bulletproof vest, and your whatever else. He's talking about spiritual warfare. And this is the spiritual self versus the flesh versus our own kind of temptations, those things that separate us from God, as well as kind of like this cosmic mythic battle between God and Satan. You know, that's what putting on the whole armor of God is, the spiritual struggle. The word jihad in its original context was very similar. So jihad, the struggle, was kind of the believer's spiritual battle with the things that would lead them away from Allah, from God. Okay, so that's where it's founded. But it was, in some cases, used as in a defensive sense. So if non-believers, infidels, were coming to conquer Islamic lands, jihad became that struggle to protect our faith. You know, that was something that was used. It is not the primary definition, but it is something that was used from time to time. So what did the religious extremists do with it? They took the minority definition, the one that isn't really the true meaning, and they defined it as the truest meaning. You know, jihad is about struggle. It is about driving out the infidels. These are our lands. This is what we have to do. Yeah, it becomes a battle cry, not against sin, but against what they perceive as enemies. Has anybody heard of takfir? I could be butchering Arabic right now. Takfir. This is the practice of declaring other Muslims to be unbelievers, which gives sanction to killing other Muslims. You know, they are not with us. They have been seduced by the West or whatever. So this kind of gives sanction to justification for other Muslims being killed and religious extremists, and they will target their own political opponents. I mean, it's pretty common practice, or will become a common practice. And then there becomes another probably word that you've heard, Sharia law, which is kind of this very extreme ethical and legal guidance. I would say probably the worst thing about the United States leaving Afghanistan, and then the BS we were fed was that, oh, you know, they're not going to be, it's extreme. Yeah, they're not going to do what they did before, which was,
They did it 24 hours.
yeah, in Sharia law, all those, you know, women for years had been going to and doing all these things that were strictly prohibited. There was retribution. There was punishment for everything that did happen. So how does this connect with, you know, the primary players in Palestine? And those two are, as we've already said, Hamas and Hezbollah. It's important to note that Hamas and the PLO have actually engaged in armed conflict against each other as well. But Hezbollah, it's also important that these organizations are founded outside of Palestine. Okay, so these didn't begin in Palestine. There are Palestinians who are driven out of their lands to find refuge in other countries, other Arab states, who are kind of radicalized by this growing, you know, fundamentalist extremist movement that's kind of sweeping through all Arab states. And once they are in these countries, they themselves, young and angry, or just angry in general, kind of begin to, oh, yeah, this is how we've been feeling. So Hezbollah begins in Lebanon, probably 1982. And it emerged during an actual Israeli occupation of southern Lebanon. And this is probably what makes Hezbollah so terrifying for Israel. There are two dominant powers in the Middle East who kind of balance each other out, but they are without a doubt the two most stable, the two most powerful, and the two that terrify Israel the most. Anybody know?
Is Jordan?
No, Jordan's kind of it's kind of this.
US was over there a bunch then.
Yeah,
And they allow a lot of missions.
yeah. Jordan is kind of that intermediary, kind of shady business dealer. You're never quite sure if they're on your side in the deal or, yeah.
Back to Syria, the big player back then.
Oh, Syria has, I mean, in reality, it's Iran and Iraq, the
Oh,
two dominant powers kind of in the Middle East. Hezbollah is essentially supported, backed by Iran and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. And if you know anything about Iran, they have an utter disdain for Israel. They want nothing more. They are a nation. Iran is a nation that in some ways identifies itself in line with radical extremist ideologies. The United States at various points has called Iran a terrorist nation, or at least the supporter of terrorists, which it has done. I mean, the way we used other countries like Afghanistan in the Cold War, Iran essentially does that with terrorist groups. It's not going to fight, but it's going to supply people who will fight for their aims. So Hezbollah is supported by Iran and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. It is a Shia Islamist group that's kind of founded on this military resistance, this political participation, and social services. So there is an element to Hezbollah that seeks to help people. But the question, I mean, I don't know enough about their motives and their leaders and the hearts and souls of these individuals. But as we've seen things kind of play out in Israel right now, is this true or is this just a cover? Like, is this just a shield? Are you just using people to kind of protect yourself and to give you some semblance of, authority, like validity? You are trying to do good things. But that does exist. And there are times in which Hezbollah is able to, at times will be seen with a shade of someone who is trying to do something good, which obviously it felt like every time they began to get that image, they quickly soured that, which I think once again continues to this isn't one group against Israel. These are multiple different sets of groups under one banner with different ideas about the best way forward and the best way to do things. But they really tap into the best way to do damage, violence. Rocket attacks are quite popular, but the more and more support Israel is getting, does anyone know what, the United States essentially gives Israel to protect it from rockets? Anybody ever?
The shield.
Close. The Iron Dome.
Yeah.
This, missile defense system that essentially allows the Israeli government to shoot down rockets.
That was called the Patriot system?
Or there's Patriot missiles, yeah, but the Iron Dome is kind of its
Yes,
infrastructure that protects
yes.
Israel from rocket attacks. And I think Islamic extremists, especially not having a state of their own, realize like traditional warfare doesn't work. So this is when we begin to see more and more suicide attacks, suicide bombings. And as we in the United States and in Europe well know, it is very difficult to stop someone who has decided to strap explosives to their body or in a vehicle that they are in and wanting to blow something up. I mean, I still think, you know, like Lauren gets us sent back to our car to get in a venue in Atlanta all the time because she doesn't have the right type of purse, or she's brought something that she wasn't supposed to, that you can't bring into this venue. As secure as it appears we are, it's not hard for someone to walk in the midst and just blow themselves up. Like it just, and it's very hard to tell in the age of the internet who's getting radicalized. You don't know. It's very difficult to see. Well, it became a lot easier to see after 9/11 for quite a while, but it's still very difficult. So suicide bombings, kidnappings, guerrilla warfare become the very popular tactics of Islamic religious extremism. Hamas is founded about 5 years later. And where you have the Shia Islamic group, which Iran is Shia, Iraq is Sunni. So they don't like each other very much. Saddam Hussein is not a fan of the Iranian government. So Hamas is Sunni, and it is an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood in Gaza. So Gaza and the West Bank. If the people in the northern sections, you know, outside of Jerusalem, those Palestinian areas, so yeah, I think you best see it on this map. So you see the West Bank up here. This is as close as what you could call stable. You have an Israeli presence within the territory of the West Bank. This is where the PLO operates primarily. If you were going to live in a Palestinian territory, you would want to live in the West Bank. Gaza, no, that is not in any way, shape, or form where you want to be. So of the two areas that are Palestinian, Gaza is really the hotbed for religious extremism. And this is where Hamas, that kind of seed is planted, and it grows from there. So what is interesting about the differences between Hezbollah and Hamas? Hezbollah starts in another country, in Lebanon. Hamas starts where? It starts in Palestine. So even though there are Palestinians involved in Hezbollah, people were probably displaced and went to Lebanon as refugees. Hamas is rooted. I mean, it comes from Gaza. And one of the reasons why Gaza has been such a contentious area is because one of the primary opponents of Israel in these early years, so the late 40s, 50s, 60s, is Egypt. And if you see Gaza, Israel, Egypt. So it is like the one area that is kind of caught in between these powers fighting each other. So things that they're even worse in the West Bank, and which makes them an even bigger breeding ground for terrorism, or kind of that angst and that anger and that resentment. Oh man. They really get into suicide bombings in the 90s. They really begin to ratchet up the violence, the terror that they will begin to use. The problem, I would say the problem, is that Hamas actually begins to gain legitimacy in Palestine. Where I'd say Hezbollah kind of is pretending to do good. I mean, they are doing some good, but Hamas is actually providing welfare, building schools, providing education, healthcare. And one of the things you have, the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, is about as corrupt as you can be. I mean, this is the thing. When you get world funding and you get money from the United States, people at the top are going to take their cuts. I mean, that's just, that is not a Middle East, but that is a human problem. The people in power are going to take their cut. They're going to give the money to the people they like or the people they're friends with, any way to secure more power. PLO, a lot of corruption. The thing about religious extremism is there is a belief, this kind of structure that the people at top are pure idealists. Is that always the case? No. But very often it is. People at top really believe in what they're doing. They believe in the goal. They believe in the purpose. Osama bin Laden truly believed in what he was doing. You know, there can be no doubt. He was a wealthy Saudi, came from all this. He had to know that what he was doing was going to drive him into caves. I mean, from a millionaire to what he ended up, you have to truly believe in what it is that you are doing, which I think a lot of these religious extremist leaders do believe. You know, they are true believers, which I think honestly, the more you believe something like this, the more dangerous you are. So what we have is this increased conflict, and no longer is Israel fighting Syria or Jordan or Egypt. Israel has developed the problem the United States will soon come to understand, and that is, how do you fight a war against people you can't find? How do you fight a war against people you have no idea where they're coming from? All right. So where I would say after the 6 Days War, there is this kind of belief that we are protected. We're not safe, but we can definitely kick anybody's butt who tries to come. But then all of a sudden, you have terrorist attacks, which I mean, how safe did we all feel pre 9/11 from any outside forces?
Nothing that happened on.
Yeah, nothing would happen on our land. Things happen,
On other people's.
you know, things happen to soldiers, our soldiers in other countries, but nothing's going to happen within our borders. And this is kind of the arrogance of every nation that has had peace and that feels safe, is you think because it hasn't happened, it can't. So then, I'm sorry, I'm going to take you a little bit over because we got to finish here. So it's very important to the next class. Then 9/11. So the United States, like I said, the United States, Western states, Russia, they all have vital interests in oil in the Middle East. So we have an interest. A lot of the Western nations still feel that kind of guilt of the Holocaust and kind of the memory of all the terrible things that had happened, and this belief, like, we have to ensure that the Jewish people in Israel are safe and protected. But you'll remember the Camp David Accords, like the United States government has put increased pressure on Israel. Like, this is not to your benefit. This is not good. You guys are making us look bad that we are supporting you and supplying you in this time, because the Palestinian people are suffering. Are they innocent? No. Hamas, Hezbollah are blowing people up. Like, nobody's innocent here, but this cannot continue. But then 9/11. Religious Islamic extremists kill thousands of Americans, and by blowing up probably our most famous skyscrapers.
Financial institution.
And you'll remember, I mean, as much as George Bush, to his credit, tried to dissuade, not all Muslims are terrorists, it could not be helped that all of a sudden, if you had that Arab olive skin, you were all of a sudden somebody to be wary of. And what this instantly does is Bush, well, maybe Bush, maybe more Dick Cheney and all of them, look to the Middle East. All of a sudden, they're a problem. Like, they killed thousands of Americans in New York City. Russia didn't do anything like that. Throughout the whole Cold War, Russia never struck within our borders. All of a sudden, it becomes angst, it becomes fear, and it becomes something we ourselves have to deal with. And when we look to the Middle East, we see one partner, one ally. And who's that? Israel. They're Europeans. A lot of Americans are dual citizens who feel that attack as an attack on themselves because they're dual citizens. They probably moved there for, like that guy we met, from an American city, had done well for themselves in the United States, probably still work in the United States. They don't have, Israel is not an Arab state. It is a Jewish state. So all of a sudden they become more trustworthy just because they're not filled with Arabs and Muslims. So Israel becomes this kind of, they're now, they're our buddies. We need them now as we begin to head in for all these conflicts in Afghanistan and Iraq. And this severely darkens US foreign policy views on groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. Like I said, they were viewed by many as an extremist group that was killing people with terrorist acts, but who were also trying to do some good for Palestinian people. It's kind of that Robin Hood type thing, rob from the rich and give to the needy. They were attempting to support people to their ability for their aims. Get people to support them, get people to rally them. But after 9/11, the United States views any Arab Islamic organization that uses terrorism as the equivalent of Al-Qaeda. I mean, it becomes that. Hamas and Hezbollah aren't Al-Qaeda, but may as well be. Yeah, exactly. They're close enough. So, whereas I would say the United States was trying to bridge the gap between Palestinians and Israelis after 9/11, this is not our concern anymore. Our concern is killing Osama bin Laden, eradicating Al-Qaeda, dealing with all these terrorist states. And before you know it, we're fighting a war in Afghanistan and we're fighting a war in Iraq, which all of a sudden, now we're fighting Sunnis and Shias who have connections to Hamas and Hezbollah. We become incredibly wary of known Hamas figures going to European countries. I mean, they are watched like hawks, just as we watch other Islamic terrorist groups. But one of the things that Bush, to his credit, once again, tries to do is create a peaceful Palestinian state as a kind of, not only to provide some peace and stability for Israel, but to give them some goodwill with Arab Muslims who can help them combat terrorism. But that is where we'll end class tonight. 9/11 has happened. The worldview of Islamic extremism, though never good, we typically don't look well on people who blow themselves up and kill tens or hundreds or thousands of people. But the way in which we view the Middle East, the way in which we view these religious extremists has totally shifted. They are now a threat, not only to friends and allies, other parts of the world, but now they are a threat to us. And as I think we've demonstrated time and time again, outside powers who hold authority and sway have severe lasting impacts on decisions that are being made on behalf of Israel, on behalf of Palestine. And I think 9/11 really is a turning point for a lot of the things I would say happen today. I think this is this is a huge factor, I would say, what happens after 9/11 into kind of our support for Israel, our belief that we need a strong, stable partner, and kind of Palestinians, once again, maybe feeling like they were close to something, now having that snatched away. So it's almost that revert back to everything's gone to hell. So in our last class, we will take ourselves from September 12th, 2011, and then we will go to the October attacks and the war, the current state of the war between Israel and Palestine now. Not a pleasant story. And I'll kind of offer some closing remarks, but I think in my preparation for class tonight, if I have offered you one takeaway for any one of these classes, it stands in opposition to any extremist view. It is never black and white with humans. There is no such thing as good guys and bad guys. As much as you want it to be that clear, definitive answer, people beyond forces of their control are almost pivoted and moved by like pawns in a game into the circumstances that will lead them to make decisions in which these actions will happen. Outside forces, whether we want to believe it or not, influence our lives more than we can even imagine. In this situation, as much as in so many others, there are good guys on what you consider the bad side, and there are bad guys on what you would consider the good side. And it's very hard to tell the difference. And often a lot of innocent people who just want to live safe, happy lives die while caught in the middle. We can't live as people without viewing all sides with empathy in the way in which I think God would call us to see. Even sinners, even people who do horrible things, we have to view them in the context that they're still a child of God. And neither one of these sides increasingly are able to do that for so many reasons. So that's where we end class tonight. Our last class will kind of lead us to, October, whatever happens between now and our next class, which, God knows what that could be.
Good, this was the best one.
I figured as we got more and more closer and closer, it'd feel more relevant, more
But it's good to
relatable.
know the history that brought us to this day.
Well, and I
Yes.
think it's all from the time of the Romans till now. I think it's
Yes,
all
yeah.
been one giant snowball.
What's-
And it just keeps rolling and rolling. You can't disconnect what happened before to what's happening now. And I think it just all tells the story. So, all right. Thank you, everybody.